Nikos Kastrinos. I coordinate Foresight in DG Research and Innovation, and I need to say that I feel honored by you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Foresight session of the R&I Days. My name is Nikos Kastrinos, and I need to say that I feel honored by your presence here. Unfortunately, Vice President Šefčovič could not talk to us live, but he sent us a video address which we will use before we kick off. Can we set the video on, please?
Thank you for showing your interest in Foresight by taking part in this dedicated session of the Research and Innovation Days. It is important for me that you are here. This commission is giving a lot of importance to Foresight. It is the first major public administration to bring strategic foresight into the highest political level. And the COVID-19 crisis has shown that this instinct was spot on. 2 weeks ago, we adopted the Commission's first annual Strategic Foresight Report. This timing was chosen to inform President von der Leyen's State of the Union address. And as you know, the Commission has used foresight for many years, but until now it was used on a piecemeal basis and largely kept at arm's length from the political level, because very often political actors tend to focus on short-term, prone to seeking quick fixes and quick gains. This Commission is set to change that and exploit the strategic value of a foresight. Let me tell you what our Strategic Foresight Report says. First, we start embedding strategic foresight into our policy making. In other words, we will use it when preparing major initiatives across all policy areas. This will bring the long term into short-term political focus and ultimately help us future-proof EU laws and policies. For example, in the Commission's recent action plan on critical raw materials, strategic foresight complemented the criticality assessment by providing the 2030 and 2050 outlooks, both demands and supply risks for strategic technologies and sectors. This knowledge feeds directly into our strategy to boost Europe's open strategic autonomy, key to building our geopolitical, economic, digital, and even green resilience. And this can be a true game changer. In addition, we will launch an EU-wide foresight network with other EU institutions, member states, think tanks, academia, civil society, and international organizations. Our ambition should be nothing less than to establish world-class anticipatory governance. Secondly, the report starts applying strategic foresight to resilience as one of the main lessons drawn from the COVID-19 pandemic. Resilience is becoming our new policy compass, and therefore it takes center stage in the report. More concretely, the report shows what COVID-19 has taught us about Europe's green, digital, socioeconomic, and geopolitical resilience. For each dimension, it identifies our vulnerabilities, strengths, and opportunities exposed by the crisis, and overall it paints a picture of what needs to be addressed in the medium to long term. But to walk the talk on resilience, we must be able to monitor it. So we are proposing to move towards building resilience dashboards in cooperation with member states and other key stakeholders. Ultimately, we must be able to answer one core question: are we, through our policies and recovery strategy, effectively making the EU more resilient? This broad approach to measuring and monitoring resilience should feed into an integrated approach to measuring people's well-being. The COVID-19 crisis has reignited the public debate on the importance of many aspects of the quality and sustainability of human life, such as education, income, jobs, and health. There has been a strong consensus in the international community on the need to go beyond conventional economic measures like GDP and to make well-being a policy target. The EU wants to lead this work. Thirdly, the report outlines the next political program for strategic foresight. It will inform not only major initiatives in the Commission work program, but also major cross-cutting initiatives such as open strategic autonomy to secure Europe's competitiveness and global leadership as an open economy. We need to stand our ground, but we must remain true to our values and openness a source of strength. The future jobs and skills linked to a green economy. For instance, in-depth view of the labor market shifts driven by the green transition is still missing. We will also explore how the green and digital transitions can rhyme better. For instance, by looking at energy consumption, we see that transferring and storing 1 gigabyte of data through the internet uses up to 7 kilowatt-hour compared to 5 millionth kilowatt-hour if done locally. As you see, we are ambitious. That's why I count on you to help us succeed. We cannot succeed without the forces of research and innovation. Science, research, and technology are powerful shapers of the future. They also provide us with essential means of coming up with reliable knowledge, analyses, and trends that are vital to build meaningful future scenarios and good foresights. Horizon Europe, the Union's framework program for research and innovation, is a key tool in building such a community across the EU and its associated states. It supports research, networking, and innovation projects and networks between public and private institutions across countries. It generates evidence, knowledge, and innovations that shape the future. Our aim is to strengthen both the use of foresight in the planning of Horizon Europe and the support of foresight by Horizon Europe to serve all policies of the Union. I want to make sure that Europe remains a global, responsible leader, an economic frontrunner, and a role model that shapes the world for the better. That is my ambition. Climate change or the future of the internet, for example, are global challenges where Europe needs to lead. To steer EU policy and decision-making in this direction, we should take courageous steps. Our annual foresight reports will inform Commission work programs and become part of our interinstitutional discussions on multi-annual programming to capture shared strategic priorities for Europe. Our strategic foresight agenda will feed our political priorities and will include high-impact, cross-cutting issues, such as the EU open strategic autonomy for new global order, and will make maximum use of RNI-based evidence and foresight. I regret that I cannot be in the session and discuss this with you. However, the next European Strategy and Political Analysis System conference in November will be an opportunity to discuss the topic of the next year's strategic foresight report and more. I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.
Okay, I must now say a few things about ESPAS and its 2020 conference. ESPAS, the European Strategy and Policy Analysis System, is an interinstitutional forward-looking analysis project that brings together the Commission, the Parliament and the Council and associates all the other parts of the EU system. ESPAS holds annual conferences, and this year's conference will be in November 18th and 19th. ESPAS conferences are in general not accessible to the public, so if anybody in the audience wish to have an invitation, drop me an email, I will put it in the chat, and I will make sure that you get invited. Now, the Vice President explained how we see foresight as an inherent part of a modern public administration and how COVID-19 accentuated the need for foresight and how foresight needs research and innovation. These are the three themes that our panel will touch upon. We have with us Duncan Cass-Beggs, Strategic Foresight Counselor at the OECD, and he will bring the OECD view of how foresight should work in a public administration. We have with us Fabiana Scapolo, Head of the Commission's Competence Center for Foresight, and she will tell us more about how foresight is planned to work in the Commission. One of the major foresight documents of the Juncker Commission was the ESPAS report, Global Trends to 2030, Challenges and Choices for Europe. And I know that most people in the audience are thinking now, had they foreseen it? Had they foreseen it? As a teaser, I hope to tell you that the word pandemic figures 4 times in the ESPAS report. But foresight is not about guessing the future, it's about exploring alternatives. We have invited the author of the ESPAS report, Florence Gaub, Deputy Director of the EU Institute for Strategic Studies, to tell us about the implications of COVID for the future. I must say that unfortunately she hasn't joined yet, so I hope that she manages to join the phone call and be with us. She will also be followed by Peter Varnay, who is an expert from Technopolis, and he has been commissioned by us to do a quick foresight study in the near-term post-COVID scenarios. And we hope to be publishing that study soon, and Peter will tell us a bit more about the post-COVID world. But what does all that mean for research and innovation policy? Well, for us it means that we have 3 obligations. One is to ensure that Horizon Europe covers appropriately the foresight needs of the Commission. One is to continue to improve the use of foresight in research and innovation strategies. And 3, to ensure that the foresight that we support finds its way into the policy process. And to fulfill these obligations, we are establishing collective governance structures that bridge Horizon Europe and the strategic foresight in the EU policies. In doing this, we take advantage of the advice from a high-level expert group called on the economic and societal impact of research and innovation, shorthand ESIR. And Sylvia Schwag-Seger, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Lund University, is a member of this group, and she is the 5th panelist, and I'm really eager to hear her views on how to best use policies, use foresight in research policies and vice versa. Now, each of our panelists will make a brief introductory statement, and then we will take questions from the audience. I urge our panelists to stick to 3 minutes or less if possible, and the audience to use the chat function for questions because the time is limited. We will harvest the chat, and if your question doesn't get answered, please don't hesitate to drop me an email, and I'll make sure that we will engage with you. Now, let me turn to Duncan and Duncan Cass-Beggs and ask him, Duncan, how should public administration use foresight? What's the OECD view? Duncan, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nikos, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So, as Nikos mentioned, I'm a counselor for strategic foresight at the OECD, where my team and I work primarily to build strategic foresight thinking into the work of the OECD itself, but we also work with a number of governments around the world in strengthening anticipatory governance in their countries and in organizations as well. And I think our prime message, as the Vice President as just mentioned, is really that strategic foresight is an essential core requirement for effective and responsible public policy making. It probably always has been, and yet we would argue that in the times that we're living in now of exceedingly high, rapid change and high uncertainty that have only been accentuated by the recent COVID crisis, it becomes more important than ever that we be building our capacity to think forward, to contemplate, consider, and prepare for a range of unexpected plausible futures. So for us, strategic foresight is above all a structured and systematic approach to exploring the future in order to inform decisions that are being made today. It's not for us primarily about predicting the future and forecasting, as I'm sure you're aware, although there's an important part that we need to be pushing as far as we can in terms of our capabilities to actually forecast the future. But really, fundamentally, it's about that reflection that comes from challenging our current assumptions about the way the world is and how it may become, and exploring a broader range of diverse futures that we could face, and thinking through what the implications could mean for our policies today. So, as I said, this is essential, and it's incredibly impressive and validating to see the work that the EU has been doing, and that it has recently even strengthened. I really congratulate you on that. I think you're becoming, a position to be a further leader in the world in this across many domains within the Commission. And but it helps us to ask the question that we are asking ourselves as well, of how do we do this well? What do public administrations and international organizations need to do to really play an even more effective role in bringing strategic foresight to bear on public policies, on making better policies for better lives, as we say at the OECD. And so there are a number of criteria, and you will find many lists that I encourage you to look at. I'll just give three as a starting point for now. Very quickly is, and I limit it to leadership incentives and institutions, to embedding, and finally to participatory. So briefly on leadership and institutions, it's important that what has that message and the requirements that make this not just something that slips to the side of the desk, but that is actually a fundamental part of how one does one's work. On embedding, there's a core message that this is part of the ongoing mainstream work of the public service. The ideal vision would be that every analyst, every director, wherever you are in the policymaking system, you are reserving a part of your time for thinking, what could change in the future in my space or outside of my space that can have an impact in my policy area, but is also about protecting the time and certain groups of people who can be really taking that longer term deep dive into looking beyond the current orthodoxies and really coming up with those alternative, provocative, what might seem radical ideas now that they can be bringing into the discussion that otherwise too often get crowded out. And finally, just want to emphasize the participatory importance of this. That means engaging everyone actively, from the senior leaders to the all across the public service, across all of those who are involved, bridging across different silos and divides. But it also means doing a better job of reaching out and using strategic foresight as a platform for engaging people outside of the administration, including various stakeholders, researchers such as many of you, as well as citizens. So I'll leave it at that, but come back, and I look forward to encourage you to continue with your efforts to strengthen anticipatory governance. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Duncan. Thank you for the compliment. Now, let me turn to Fabiana. Fabiana, Duncan said that we are becoming one of the leading lights in foresight. Can you tell us a bit more about what we do?
Yes, thank you, Nikos, and good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen that are following us. So first of all, I am Fabiana Scapola, and I lead the Competence Center on Foresight of the Joint Research Center. And inside the European Commission, together with the Secretary General, the Joint Research Center is responsible for the coordination of the strategic foresight activities that we are doing in support of the mandate of Vice President Šefčovič, and we work in a very close collaboration with his cabinet. So I think that the decision of leveraging and mainstreaming foresight now in policymaking in the Commission, as we heard it in the video of Vice President Šefčovič, could not have come at a more opportune moment. As also Duncan was saying, the COVID crisis has highlighted the importance of looking at possible disruptive events in order to increase our ability to be better prepared for them, strengthen also our resilience capacity, and bounce forward to undertake transformation. So in practice, strategic foresight should become an integral part of the policy cycle through the Commission Better Regulation Toolbox, for example, in ex-ante impact assessment. And the objective is to ensure that EU policies can draw on a clear understanding of possible future trends, especially in policy areas that are subject to rapid structural change. In addition, strategic foresight can also help assessing whether existing European laws remain fit for the future. And it is possible also to look at applying strategic foresight, and this is also what we want to do inside the Commission, to acquire a systemic view of what are the long-term policy objectives, to understand where there are synergies and trade-offs in the different policy initiatives that the Commission is already pursuing, including the digital and green transition, and with the aim at ensuring policy coherence. In his video, the Vice President referred to a regular stream of strategic foresight activities supporting the EU policymaking, and these activities will be based on inclusive and participatory foresight processes, both inside and outside the Commission. So the objective is really to build a collaborative and inclusive foresight community within European and international institutions and partners. And inside the Commission, we have already established a strategic foresight network that will be involved in the identification, in the scoping, and in the co-creation of all the strategic foresight activities that the Commission will undertake. For example, we are already thinking about the next annual foresight report that will be built on an inclusive foresight process involving the ESPAS network, but of course we want to reach out to other relevant stakeholders, including in member states, in industry, in academia, and in civil society organization.
Wonderful. Can I interrupt you a bit, Fabiana? Because I would like to turn the attention a bit to the post-COVID discussion, which is an important element of our title. And there is one thing that I have done since the COVID crisis happened is that I started looking in old foresight reports for the word pandemic. And I was really surprised with how frequently the word arises. But we have commissioned Peter Varnay and his team to actually have a look at the pandemic in the near term and the near-term implications. And I would like to bring Peter in at this moment, if I can, and ask him, what kind of scenarios do you see in 2-3 years' time, Peter?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone in the audience. Thank you for this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the work we have been doing. Nikos, one thing is certain, and any of the scenarios we look at, we will not go back to a Europe as we knew it before the pandemic. And the choices we make now will partly determine how the new normal will be and how Europe will look like. What we understand is that the central idea is that the new coronavirus will not be eradicated by 2023 and perhaps never. We have to live with that. And in the coming years, we will learn a lot about the disease, develop new treatments, but safe and effective vaccines will not be available before 2022. And the real question is, however, not the vaccine, but how the population will acquire a lasting immunity and how this depends on many, many factors beyond just the existence of a vaccine. But in any case, we expect to see an outbreak and localized outbreaks happening in the coming years and even beyond 2023. And in some areas, and some form of social distancing will be required. So overall, the burden on health system will increase, and due to some of the indirect effects as well of the current crisis, like an increase, we will see non-communicable diseases, mental health conditions, and the post-COVID complications. And it will worsen the health and well-being of EU residents, and with a consensus that the health inequalities across the EU will strongly increase. And given this backdrop, we looked at the social and economic consequences of the crisis and what opportunities that might exploit. And the economy is largely recovered by 2023, but it will operate less efficiently and with lower levels of growth. And some sectors will simply be very scarred by this couple of years. And unsurprisingly, general unemployment will rise graduate unemployment less, but among low-skilled workers and the youth, unemployment will significantly rise. And I would say rather alarmingly, inequality across multiple dimensions will increase in most of our scenarios we developed, and extreme poverty, domestic violence, discriminations will all rise. And those who are already vulnerable will become more marginalized in the future. So that's possibly the bad news. That however, trends that are accelerated, and one of that is the digital industries that will consolidate their hold and dominate the economy in the future. I'm thinking of automation in healthcare. It will increase. Retail businesses will move permanently online, and the provision of online education in the EU will significantly increase. So experts' view was that the EU governments will try and eliminate the digital divide, both the infrastructure and the skills-related ones, and the ones that exist between rural and urban areas. And this will contribute largely start of a move of people moving from cities to the countryside. And finally, I just want to say that the role of science, and especially the medical and health sciences, will very much depend on how quickly the global efforts to develop antivirals and vaccines will succeed, and also how politicians will portray the role of scientists in their decision-making. But there will almost certainly be a boost to open science. We see that very clearly. Our experts were almost equally split whether the science will play a bigger or a smaller role in policymaking across the EU by 2023 compared to the pre-COVID times. So I stop here and I hand back the mic to you. There will be more details coming through in the publication soon.
Thank you very much, Peter. It is interesting to see that the experts are divided as to whether that would be more open science or more closed science. I don't know what the opposite of open science is. So I want to ask Sylvia, what should research and innovation policy do about these things? How should we respond to the short-term versus the long-term challenge? Should we put everything in COVID now, or should we trust that COVID will be over and then put everything on something of much later? What should we do? Sylvia, we cannot hear you. Okay. While Sylvia is trying to, while we try to sort out the problem with Sylvia's microphone, I'll go back to Fabiana, who I interrupted very, very rudely, to ask her about what is the system that we use in the Commission to develop more foresight evidence and put it across the policies, which was what you were describing.
Yeah, okay, so we are using participatory type of approaches, and we are feeding the policy making with the results of foresight exercises. I can bring you a very concrete example. Digitax Sud came to us in the end of 2018 with the request of developing a new vision for 2040 because they wanted to understand how the future of the custom union would be, and together with all the stakeholders, and when I mean stakeholder, I really mean representative of custom union director general in member states. We have developed a foresight process that includes the scenario on the future of custom, but also a vision on where the custom union would be in 2040. And this vision is being included in the Commission communication action plan on customs that will be in the college on next Monday. And it is really part of the new action plan on customs that the college will endorse next week. So here we really had the opportunity to work together with DigiTaxud, with the stakeholders of the DigiTaxud, but also to go a bit beyond and involve other stakeholders to develop something together. And this is important because once you do that, there is this ownership effect that the stakeholder own the vision, and it becomes a common objective that they want to reach together.
Okay, thanks very much, Fabiana. I think that now we are ready to pass to Sylvia, and it was very interesting to hear how foresight is penetrating all the other policies, but the R&I policy for the post-COVID world and the role of foresight in this is very important for us and very dear to my heart. So Sylvia, up to you.
Do you hear me now? You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the technological hiccup. I'm very happy to be in this session, and I also want to start by congratulating you on the work you're doing, which I think from not least or particularly from a research and innovation policy perspective is rapidly gaining in importance and relevance for policies going into the future. So I'm a member of this expert group to the European Commission, and we produced a document that is called Protect, Prepare, and Transform. And it's all about how research and innovation policy should tackle not only the current crisis and the pandemic, but also how we can prepare our future, our society and our world for the future, and then also how we can transform it. And so I just wanted to say very briefly that research and innovation policy has been changing quite significantly in recent years, and it has become increasingly directional, which means that research and innovation policy is starting to focus more and more on the global challenges we face and on how research and innovation can contribute to addressing these challenges. And there it is a significant shift from a traditional innovation policy, which was focused mainly on just promoting product development or a non-interventionist sort of generic promotion of innovation. The second thing is that therefore research policy has assumed sort of a higher ambition and is trying to achieve and drive even transformative change, systemic change. So the reason I bring these things up is because I think, as you can see from the previous discussion on foresight, is that we sort of see a convergence of both foresight and R&I policy becoming more directional, becoming less focused only on technology forecasting or on promoting technologies, and actually adopting a more societal orientation, a more transformative ambition, and a desire to sort of shape the future and own the future. And I think this makes it extremely clear why foresight is becoming increasingly important in research and innovation policy, and that's also why it's one of the key points we list in our memorandum that we wrote as advice for the European Commission, that foresight will be increasingly important in ensuring a successful research and innovation policy. And perhaps my final point, another point of convergence between foresight and research and innovation policy, is the fact that research and innovation is becoming increasingly linked to other policy areas. So we see these discussions on technological sovereignty emerging in Europe, the increasing superpower and technology clash between the US and China. So it means that technology and innovation policies and research are becoming linked to matters of national security, of future ownership of dominant technologies, but also of future development of, for example, climate change and other issues. So the interlinkage of the policy areas and the increasing embeddedness of R&I policy in other policy areas also brings forward the importance of foresight in formulating and shaping policy. I will stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I want to go back to Peter and ask Peter, what are the near-term projections for the amount of R&D that we will have? Are we going to have a boost in the R&D budgets of corporates and governments, or is the eating into the budget of the recession going to affect negatively? What were the projections there?
Nikos, the R&I will continue to attract political support, no doubt about it, but it is unlikely that the EU and national governments can substantially increase the R&D expenditure. We got indication that the business sector, pharma, might be able to increase their own budgets in medical innovation, and we will see an increased investment in medical research by the public sector as well, but it will possibly displace work in other fields to some extent, and perhaps affecting other SDGs as well. So we expect, for example, that planetary crisis will continue to be a focal point for investment and funding for activities relating to green economy. So that is the hope that at least the budget that we currently have will be distributed in a way that will be attracted to the key issues of this time.
Okay, thanks. We have a question from the audience, and I would like to pass it to Duncan, if I may. It's okay if you can't then respond to it, it's fine. But the question is, have you been using foresight to look at future pandemics beyond COVID? How about outbreaks related to antimicrobial resistance?
Okay, well, excellent question. Thank you very much. So I think it's interesting that one of the questions that often got asked was, where was the foresight telling us about COVID? How come we didn't know about this? And then, of course, all the foresighters will return to you and say, we were telling you about it. Now, there's been a huge amount of work, and I like the expression that, COVID was not actually a black swan. It was more of this, a gray rhino, in sense it's just like a big, obvious thing we totally knew about. It was running towards us with a big pointy horn. The question was just, was when, not if. And I think some of the others that you mentioned, like clearly antimicrobial resistance is in that same category. We've known about this. We've been talking about it. I mean, this is not something that's even so important for the foresight world necessarily, because just getting it on the agenda. I know the health directorate at the OECD has been doing a lot of work on that issue to both get it on the agenda and to develop the solutions and the responses to it. But I do still think that there's an important role for foresighters in taking on some of those changes that we can see. I mean, another huge one, of course, would be climate emergency and broader environmental crises that we're facing. That there's still work to be done, particularly around looking through the intersections between what could happen in that space, but also how that interacts with a very different and rapidly changing economy and society on the other side. And that's where you start to get to potential interactions and impacts that are not immediately intuitive. And so I would encourage that those of you involved in strategic foresight or who are working on any of these really important emerging issues to do that kind of cross-fertilization work where you're going and saying, okay, what are the latest futurists saying about the economy of 2035 or the society of 2035, and how could that interact with the various scenarios we're coming up with around climate or around antimicrobial resistance and others. So I think it really needs to continue on all those fronts, but also the interactions between them. And that's something we're certainly encouraging and working with our own organization and others with.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from the audience, which is, do Horizon Europe missions relate with the foresight work being done? There is a factual element in this, which is that for each of the Horizon Europe foresight missions, we launched a specific foresight study to support them. But I know that ESIR had interacted with at least some of the missions, so I wanted to ask Sylvia whether this showed in the interactions between the missions and the ESIR.
I can't tell you the detail of the work within the missions, but in general, I can tell you that I definitely think that there is an increasing awareness in the R&I community and the research and innovation policy community also surrounding the mission work on the need to have a better common understanding or view or perception of what might happen in the future. And this is precisely because of the ambition to want to own and change, and shape the future together, which is exactly the definition of these missions, which is setting clear targets for what we want to accomplish, not just in terms of a specific technology or product or a sector, but in terms of how we want to shape society when it comes to anything from climate change or preventive healthcare and other issues. So I think that you can see it in the policies, that there is a growing recognition, and that it is playing in this notion that we have to sit down together and think about what we think is likely to happen, as you also do in your work. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And as Fabiana said, what do we need to do now? And this not least ties also into regulatory issues. What laws do we need to change now? And so innovation policy is becoming increasingly concerned with that, and there foresight comes in.
Okay. Thank you. We are approaching to the end of our session. So now I would like to ask our panelists for their prediction for 2030. I know that this is a very tricky exercise because you can predict things that are very likely and not interesting. I'm not interested in that. I am actually interested in something that you would want to have a bet on for 2030 and to have, say, a 10% chance of materializing. What would it be? I'll start with Duncan.
Okay, well, thanks, Nico, but I'm going to dodge the question and give you 2035, where strategic foresight has become far more embedded in our policy-making thinking, both within administrations, but I think very importantly beyond. It's wonderful that we've got things like Black Mirror that are various dystopian science fiction that are stimulating people's imagination, but I think we really need to take that further and really create across the public, across our societies, a much deeper understanding and dialogue about the broader range of futures we could be facing and the choices that makes for us and the choices that gives us about actually shaping the kind of future we want. So that's I hope that my aspiration will turn into a prediction that you can see realized.
Okay, thanks, Duncan. Fabiana, what's your bet for 2030?
I cannot predict, but I can say what I would like to see. I would like to see that foresight is taught in school, at university, because each individual should become better in dealing with the future. It should become better in discussing what are key trends, drivers of change, to understand what it is emerging. And so to also be able to look for different alternative picture of the future scenarios.
Okay. Peter, you shouldn't be allowed to duck the question. Give us a prediction.
Well, obviously what I would like to see is that foresight will be driven not only by technological projections, but in the, as Duncan said, embeddedness in society. And my personal prediction is that, and hope is that we will continue to see an acceleration of digitalization and automation in healthcare. And by 2030, we'll be using possibly other means, not going to see a doctor for most health issues, but become more frequent visitors of virtual hospitals. And I would like to see cool technologies such as holograms that will make remote care more efficient and also a better experience for patients. So this is where I see technologies and societies come together.
Okay, cool. Sylvia, what is your prediction or wish for foresight, as the question has been subverted to?
So I think what we will need and what I hope to see is a transformation of education, in content, in form, and also in its link to the knowledge we are generating. So I think we need a transformation of how we perceive education, how we deliver it, and not least, for example, I think that we've spent far too much time educating specialists in their own fields, and this has led to the kind of siloed policy making that has brought us to some of the problems that we are at today. And here I think Foresight can play a great role, and this education in turn is my hope by 2030 will also lead to a different form of leadership, a more enlightened form of leadership. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much. My personal wish for 2030 is that, well, there was a law passed in Wales that required every legislation to be accompanied by a report on its impact on future generations. And I think that this is a brilliant obligation that government and the Commission should take on. And my wish for 2030 is that all the world's governments have an obligation to say explicitly in what way they prepare and they address the benefit of future generations. But thank you all very much. Thank you to the audience for being with us. Thank you to our panelists. And I hope to see you at least next year, but even before that, maybe in the ESPAS conference in November. Thank you. Goodbye.